Ji-yun slowly opened his eyes to the morning light filtering through the wooden window. He blinked, adjusting to the quiet stillness of the room. Something felt off. He turned his head slightly. Kyung-hoon was gone. A flicker of unease crept in. Had Kyung-hoon left? Did something happen? Ji-yun tried to sit up, only to be reminded of the lingering pain in his body. He frowned in frustration when he realized his legs still wouldn't cooperate. Just as he was about to call out, the door slid open, and in walked Kyung-hoon, balancing a tray of food with a proud grin on his face. "You're awake," Kyung-hoon said, setting the tray down beside him. Ji-yun exhaled in relief, his lips curling into a small smile. "Where did you go?" Kyung-hoon scoffed playfully. "Where else? I helped Haesu prepare this meal for you." He straightened his posture dramatically. "I personally cut the vegetables and even stirred the porridge." "Be honored." Ji-yun chuckled. "Did you really? Or did Haesu just let you watch?" Kyung-hoon feigned offense. "I'll have you know that I am more than capable in the kitchen." He picked up a spoonful of the steaming porridge and held it up. "Now, open your mouth and taste my masterpiece." Ji-yun rolled his eyes but obediently took a bite. The warmth of the meal spread through him, comforting in a way he hadn't realized he needed. It wasn't perfect, the seasoning was slightly off, but it was made with effort, and that made it special. Kyung-hoon watched him expectantly. "Well?" Ji-yun swallowed, pretending to think. "Not bad. A little too much salt, though." Kyung-hoon groaned. "That old man tricked me. He said I was doing great." Ji-yun laughed softly, and for a moment, it felt like they weren't tangled in court politics or running from enemies. It was just the two of them, sharing a simple meal. After a few more bites, Ji-yun hesitated before asking, "Are you still waiting for my answer?" Kyung-hoon met his gaze, setting the spoon down. "I told you before, I'm patient." His voice was gentle but firm. "There's no need to rush. I just want to spend as much time with you as I can before we return to that chaotic palace life." Ji-yun looked away, playing with the edge of the blanket. "Son, he must be worried about me," he muttered. A shadow passed over Kyung-hoon's face, but he quickly masked it. He clenched his jaw slightly, forcing himself to smile. Now wasn't the time. He couldn't tell Ji-yun about Sun He's betrayal. About how she had played a role in his kidnapping. Not now. Instead, Kyung-hoon reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from Ji-yun's forehead. "I'm sure she is," he said softly. Haesu suddenly entered the room, his expression calm yet expectant. "Your Highness," he said, inclining his head slightly toward Kyung-hoon. Both Kyung-hoon and Ji-yun froze. He had told them last night that he knew who they were. They didn't believe him, but now. Ji-yun turned to Kyung-hoon, his brows raised in question, but Kyung-hoon was already staring at Haesu with suspicion. "You knew?" Kyung-hoon asked cautiously. Haesu chuckled as he walked over to the table, sorting through his herbs. "I may be old, but I am not blind," he said simply. "I have been in the presence of royals before. You carry yourself with the weight of responsibility, and your aura speaks of power." He glanced at Ji-yun. "And you, young one, you hide yourself well, but fate has a way of bringing the truth to light." Ji-yun felt a strange unease settle in his chest. He had underestimated Haesu. "Why are you telling us this now?" Kyung-hoon asked, still wary. "Because I need your help," Haesu replied smoothly. "I am making medicine for Ji-yun, but I need water from the nearby stream. Since I am occupied, I hoped you could fetch it." Ji-yun noticed Kyung-hoon's posture relax slightly. He was still on edge, but Haesu had given them no reason to doubt his intentions so far. "I'll go," Kyung-hoon agreed. Ji-yun immediately straightened. "I'm coming too." Kyung-hoon turned to him, exasperated. "Ji-yun, you still can't walk. I don't care, Ji-yun shot back. I refuse to be left alone while you do all the work. Kyung-hoon sighed, rubbing his temple. Stubborn as ever. He glanced at Haesu, who was watching them with amusement. Fine, Kyung-hoon relented. He crouched in front of him. Get on, he said. Ji-yun hesitated for only a moment before wrapping his arms around Kyung-hoon's shoulders. Kyung-hoon lifted him effortlessly, his strong arms securing Ji-yun in place as he stood up. Ji-yun tried not to focus on how warm Kyung-hoon's body felt against his or how safe he felt in his hold. As they made their way to the stream, they passed a few villagers, who smiled at them. What a devoted husband, an old woman whispered to her friend. They look so in love, another murmured. Ji-yun tensed, waiting for Kyung-hoon to correct them, but he didn't. Instead, he simply chuckled under his breath. Ji-yun felt his cheeks heat up. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He muttered. Kyung-hoon smirked. Maybe. Ji-yun huffed but didn't argue. The air between them grew thick with tension, every movement, every shift of Kyung-hoon's arms reminding Ji-yun of how close they were. It was both comforting and overwhelming. When they reached the stream, they were met with a group of young women gathering water. One of them, a strikingly confident girl named Yun, immediately took notice of Kyung-hoon. Well, she purred. You must be new around here. Kyung-hoon barely glanced at her. Just passing through, he replied smoothly. But Yun wasn't deterred. She moved closer, completely ignoring Ji-yun. A strong, handsome man like you must have a lover waiting for him somewhere, she said, batting her lashes. Ji-yun clenched his jaw. Was she blind? Did she not see him sitting right there? Kyung-hoon sighed. I do, he said simply. Yun tilted her head. Really? Then where? Ji-yun had had enough. He cleared his throat loudly. Right here, he snapped. Yun blinked in surprise, finally giving Ji-yun a once-over. Her gaze lingered on his delicate features, and a hint of jealousy flickered in her eyes. Oh. You're his. Ji-yun smirked, tilting his head slightly. Yes. Yun scoffed. You don't seem like much of a match. Ji-yun narrowed his eyes. And yet, here I am. The other girls giggled behind their hands as Yun's face twisted in annoyance. Clearly, she wasn't used to being dismissed. With a huff, she turned on her heel and stormed off, the others quickly following. Kyung-hoon watched the exchange with amusement. That was unexpected. Ji-yun crossed his arms. What? You wanted me to let her continue throwing herself at you? Kyung-hoon smirked. Are you jealous? Ji-yun scoffed. Of course not. Kyung-hoon hummed in amusement, filling the bucket with water. You're cute when you're jealous. Ji-yun rolled his eyes. You enjoy flirting too much. Kyung-hoon leaned closer. Only with you. Ji-yun's breath hitched. His heart pounded against his ribs. Was Kyung-hoon just teasing, or did he really mean that? Taking a deep breath, Ji-yun asked, Are you just playing games with me? Am I just something to pass the time with? His voice was quieter now, his insecurities slipping through. Why are you so willing to marry me? Kyung-hoon turned serious. He met Ji-yun's gaze, his eyes filled with something raw and unwavering. I wouldn't be here with you if I wasn't serious, Kyung-hoon said. You really want to know how I see you? Ji-yun swallowed hard. Yes. Kyung-hoon exhaled before finally confessing, I've liked you from the moment we first met as children, the night we both ran away from our homes. Ji-yun's eyes widened. I searched for you, Kyung-hoon continued. But I never found you. And then, suddenly, you appeared in my life again, disguised as a woman. I knew right away that you must have lived an unfortunate life, and I vowed to protect you. Ji-yun's chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, to push away these feelings that terrified him, but Kyung-hoon's gaze was so steady, so warm. You don't have to say anything, Kyung-hoon said gently. You don't have to feel pressured to reciprocate my feelings. Just, let me love you. Let me protect you, just this once. Ji-yeon clenched his hands into fists, feeling his walls slowly crumble. Before he could respond, Kyung-hoon suddenly splashed water on him. Ji-yeon gasped, sputtering in shock. You. Kyung-hoon laughed. You looked too serious. Lighten up. Ji-yeon scowled before splashing water back at him, the two of them laughing as they played. But in the middle of it all, Kyung-hoon suddenly froze. Ji-yeon's laughter faded. Slowly, Kyung-hoon reached out and brushed his fingers through the strands. Beautiful, he murmured. Ji-yeon's cheeks warmed. Let's go home, he muttered. Kyung-hoon smirked, lifting Ji-yeon onto his back once more. As they walked back, Ji-yeon remained quiet, lost in thought. Kyung-hoon noticed. Are you okay? Ji-yeon hesitated before nodding. I'm fine. But deep down, he wasn't sure. The grand throne room of the palace was heavy with tension, the air thick with the scent of incense and the unspoken weight of political maneuvering. The king sat upon his throne, his expression composed but weary, while the queen beside him radiated barely contained frustration. The massive doors swung open, and Tae-jin strode in, his steps firm but his face carefully unreadable. He bowed deeply before speaking. Your Majesties, he began, his voice steady. The crown prince is missing. The queen's face twisted with anger before he had even finished speaking. Missing, she repeated sharply. How could you let this happen? Tae-jin remained still, his head lowered in deference. You were tasked with keeping an eye on him, she continued, her voice rising. And yet, you let him run off like a reckless fool. How utterly incompetent. She scoffed, shaking her head in disgust. Perhaps I expected too much of you. Tae-jin absorbed the insult without a flicker of emotion. I take full responsibility, Your Majesty. You should, she snapped. Because if anything happens to Kyung-hoon, you will be held accountable. Before she could continue, the doors opened once again, and Minister Jin-suk entered, a composed smile on his face. Your Majesties, he greeted smoothly, bowing with just the right amount of deference. I came to offer my heartfelt congratulations on your wise decision to select a new crown princess. The queen shot him a sharp look, clearly irritated by his sudden appearance. State your purpose, Minister Jin, she said coldly. Jin-suk sighed dramatically. I must, however, remind your Majesties of an important matter. His eyes gleamed with something unreadable as he straightened. According to traditional royal law, the crown prince must not be absent from the palace without notice for more than 3 days. If he fails to return within that time, his title will be forfeit. The room fell into stunned silence. Jin-suk's smile deepened. And as per the law, the title would then pass to the second oldest royal-born son. He turned slightly, his gaze flickering toward Tae-jin. That would be your illegitimate son, Tae-jin, who, as crown prince, would be required to marry my daughter, Min-seo, thereby making her the new crown princess. The queen shot up from her seat, her fury barely restrained. This is absurd, she spat. You dare suggest my son be stripped of his rightful title over such a trivial matter? Jin-suk remained unbothered, his expression polite. It is not I who suggest it, Your Majesty, but the law. Surely, you would not wish to disregard the traditions that have guided our great kingdom for centuries. The queen clenched her fists, her face dark with rage. You planned this, didn't you? She accused. How convenient that you bring this up now. Jin-suk only smiled. I simply follow the law, Your Majesty. Tae-jin, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I was unaware of this, he said quietly, his expression unreadable. Jin Suk turned to him with an approving nod. Then I trust you will do your duty should the time come. The queen scoffed. You expect Tae-jin to betray his own brother? Jin Suk's smile didn't waver. I expect him to uphold the law. The queen opened her mouth to argue further, but the king, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. Kyung-hoon will return. His voice, though calm, carried an air of finality. Jin Suk's smile faltered just slightly, but he quickly recovered. I certainly hope so, Your Majesty. It would be a shame if the law had to be enforced. With that, he bowed again and took his leave, his presence lingering like a shadow long after he was gone. The queen turned to the king, frustration evident in her eyes. You cannot possibly sit by and allow this. The king exhaled slowly. Kyung-hoon will return, he repeated, but this time, there was an edge to his voice, a quiet warning. Tae-jin remained still, his mind racing. He had never desired the throne, nor had he ever entertained the thought of marrying Min Seo. Yet, here he was, being pushed into a position that could change everything. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. The night was quiet, save for the gentle rustling of the trees outside Ji-yun's room. He sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, but his mind was elsewhere. No matter how much he tried to push it aside, his thoughts kept drifting back to Kyung-hoon, his words, his warmth, the way he had confessed so openly. Just then, the door creaked open, and Kyung-hoon stepped in with a playful smile. You're awake, he noted. Do you want to see the moon with me? Ji-yun hesitated, suddenly feeling self-conscious under Kyung-hoon's gaze. The moon, he repeated, shifting awkwardly. Yes, Kyung-hoon said simply, stepping closer. Without waiting for Ji-yun's answer, he bent down and carefully lifted him into his arms. Ji-yun's breath caught in his throat, his face heating up as he clung to Kyung-hoon's shoulders. I could have walked with your help, he protested weakly. Kyung-hoon chuckled. This is faster, he teased. Besides, I don't mind carrying you. Ji-yun didn't know what to say to that, so he remained quiet as Kyung-hoon carried him out into the courtyard. The night sky was vast, the moon glowing beautifully above them, but Ji-yun barely noticed it. His gaze was drawn to Kyung-hoon instead, the way his eyes softened in the moonlight, the way he smiled so easily. Nearby, a group of little children giggled and played, their mother watching as they ran around the temple grounds. They had come seeking blessings from Ha-su, but at the moment, they were more interested in chasing after Kyung-hoon, who had somehow gotten caught up in their games. Ji-yun sat quietly, watching as Kyung-hoon let the children climb on him, laughing as he lifted one onto his shoulders. He had never seen this side of Kyung-hoon before, so carefree, so gentle. His heart ached in a way he didn't fully understand. You're already in love with him, a familiar voice said beside him. Ji-yun blinked in surprise, finally noticing Ha-su sitting beside him. That's ridiculous, Ji-yun muttered, looking away. I never said that. Ha-su smiled knowingly. You didn't have to. Ji-yun frowned, his fingers tightening over the fabric of his sleeve. Even if I was, he hesitated. It doesn't change anything. Ha-su studied him for a moment before speaking. You're afraid, he said gently. Afraid that no matter how much you love him, you'll end up betraying him. Ji-yun stiffened. His head snapped toward Ha-su. How do you know that? He demanded. Who are you really? Ha-su simply smiled, unbothered by the question. That's not important, he said. What's important is you, Ji-yun. You keep worrying about a future that hasn't happened yet. But right now, you have someone who loves you, who wants to protect you. Shouldn't you allow yourself to be happy, even just for a moment? Ji-yun's lips parted, but no words came out. He turned his gaze back toward Kyung-hoon, who was still playing with the children, completely unaware of their conversation. Ha-su was right. He had spent so long running away from his own feelings, convincing himself that love was dangerous, that it was something he couldn't afford. But deep down, hadn't he already made his choice? Taking a deep breath, Ji-yun pushed himself up, his legs still weak but filled with newfound determination. He limped forward, ignoring the discomfort, and stopped just in front of Kyung-hoon. Kyung-hoon turned to him, surprised. Ji-yun. You. Before he could finish, Ji-yun met his gaze and spoke, voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. I'll marry you. Kyung-hoon froze, his eyes widening in shock. Ji-yun smirked slightly. But, he added, crossing his arms, you still owe me a proper proposal before the wedding. For a moment, Kyung-hoon just stared at him, as if making sure he had heard correctly. Then, suddenly, he let out a joyous laugh and pulled Ji-yun into a tight embrace, lifting him slightly off the ground. You have no idea how happy you just made me, he murmured, holding him close. Ji-yun felt his heart squeeze at the warmth of Kyung-hoon's embrace. Slowly, almost shyly, he wrapped his arms around him in return. The children and their mother, who had been watching, clapped excitedly at the scene. Even Ha-soo beamed, clapping his hands together. Well then, Ha-soo announced happily, it looks like we have a wedding to prepare. As the laughter and cheers filled the air, Ji-yun leaned into Kyung-hoon's embrace, letting himself enjoy the moment, for once, without fear. Even if the future was uncertain, even if danger still lurked ahead. Tonight, he allowed himself to be happy. Thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe to the channel for more episodes.